I think we don't respect
Okay,
that staff.
everyone, let's go ahead and get
Because it
started
is hard.
so we can maximize our time with Dr. Knost. We appreciate that.
Before dinner.
As you notice, there are wireless microphones that I should be using. This is being recorded, so it can be shared publicly. So when we get to the section where you have an opportunity for follow-up questions, you'll want to press the button, make sure that it's green while you're speaking, and then to avoid any embarrassing faux pas, you want to turn it off when you're done speaking. Okay?
All right, so you need mine on nonstop.
Pretty much,
You
sir.
need that to be green.
This helps the camera direct where folks are
Sure.
speaking. So,
Absolutely.
welcome everyone. Thank you for participating so richly in the process of identifying a future superintendent. We're very fortunate to have a candidate here today, Dr. Eric Knost. Did I pronounce it correctly?
You most definitely
Dr.
did.
Eric Knost. And I'm going to give him a moment to talk a little bit about his background before we get started. But I will take the time, because I think it's appropriate to do so. If we could go around and give introductions, just state your name, please, and the organization or entity that you're representing.
My name is Tim Garcia, and I'm here on behalf of LULAC Council 10, Davenport, Iowa.
Mike Reyes, I'm the LULAC State Director for the state of Iowa.
Ralph Kelly on behalf of Punch People Uniting Neighbors and Churches.
I'm Vera Kelly. I'm representing the MetroCon branch NAACP number 4019 here in Davenport, Iowa.
Hi, I'm Nicole Sisney-Durbin with Family Resources.
Hi, Carrie Abbott with United Way of the Quad Cities.
Jennifer Best, Iowa State University Extension Outreach here in the Scott County office.
Tim Chen for the Davenport Schools Foundation.
Chad Dyson, I'm the director for Davenport Parks and Recreation.
Mike Miller, Riverbend Food Bank.
Lorelei Fouts Friendly House, which is a neighborhood center settlement house in the community.
Brad Martell, Scott County Family YMCA.
Laura Reet, I'm with the Figge Art Museum.
Amy Groskopf, I'm with the Davenport Public Library.
Rusty Boroff with 180.
And John Dute with Humility Homes and Services. We provide emergency shelter and housing for people experiencing homelessness.
Thank you.
Dr. Knost, I hope you'll agree it's a very diverse panel and a very interesting panel coming from a number of different angles that help support us in our work in educating youth in the community. So let's just talk briefly about how we're going to proceed here. I solicited questions from these experts in the community some time ago. I assembled them, kind of culled them into 12 succinct questions that we're going to ask. There will be some time also for follow-up at the very end. So in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and give you an opportunity to make a brief introductory, and then we'll get started with the questions.
So I figured out if you don't talk, this is smart enough to shut off on its own. So I think the key is I should keep talking, and we'll stay on. Eric Knost, very much pronounce my name the right way. I am from the St. Louis area. I've been there all of my life. I wish I could tell you some wonderful stories of my different places I've lived and educated myself, but it's all right in St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis. I've been a public school product and a public school advocate, and I am public school. I advocate for public schools. I advocate for children in public schools. I'm very active at the state level, active with my legislators, my representatives, my partner organizations, and I've always defined what I do as I work every day to help kids thrive, and I love the concept of public education, that we don't pick our children. We are there for them no matter what. If they choose to go elsewhere, or if they choose to be outward bound, or if they choose private parochial or homeschooling or whatever, that of course is their choice, but we're always there with open arms to welcome them back in, and we're not there to judge our students. We don't judge their background. We don't judge their situation. They're all students that deserve to thrive in the world, and it's been my experience when I see children that fall in love with life, they tend to thrive. And I believe in educating the whole child, addressing social and emotional needs, as well as, and even more so, said a lot of things today that I always preface by saying it may not be the right answer, but I'm going to be candid with you in this process. I think I interviewed differently after 31 years of experience than I did when I, maybe had 10 or 15 years of experience. But I have no motive to let you see me in any other way than who I am and what I'm all about. So 31 years. I'm a musician. I still play professionally when I have time, but I was a music teacher. My undergrad was a music degree. I went to a liberal arts college, so I could take education classes while I was majoring in music. And when I finished with my music degree, all I had to do was student teach, and I was able to get state certification because I had all of those education courses, so equivalent to a Bachelor of Music Education. I've taught all music at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school. I've been an administrator. My first administrator job was, they called it an intern, but I was an assistant principal in an elementary school. That just meant that they were going to pay me as a teacher, but allow me to get my feet wet as an administrator. I've been an administrator, a building administrator in a high school, assistant principal, and I was the principal of a high school of 2,200 students in the Melville School District, where I ultimately ended up becoming an area superintendent, a deputy superintendent, and the superintendent for the district. Early in my career, I taught in the Rockwood School District. That's where I was an assistant principal at elementary school. Had the opportunity to come back as superintendent. I was recruited to do that. I was not job searching at all. I was planning on retiring in the Melville School District, had a good run there, and was recruited to come back to Rockwood as superintendent. So I've been there for 5 years. And I've been through some challenging situations, many that I'll probably speak to based upon your questions. But I'm going to give you a warning. I'm pretty simple. If you're expecting a guy to pull out packets and share metrics and try to talk in jargon or overheads, I'm not your guy. I'm not going to do that. I won't do it today, and I won't do that if you hire me as your superintendent. But I've had an effective run that I'm proud of that you can all Google and look at. I'm very present on social media. I'm a communicator, I'm a collaborator, and I just love people. I love engaging with people, and I'm inspired by youth. Not my youth. I'm inspired by the youth of the kids that we serve in this great thing we call public education. I didn't say this last time. I don't want to go on and on, but I didn't say this in the last group, and then they said, "Why are you leaving?" later on. And I said, well, I didn't put that in my introductory comments because I ran out of time because they told me to take 3 minutes. So do I have time to explain?
You're okay.
Okay. Because people say, well, so why are you leaving? Why are you driving up to Davenport and considering being superintendent there and a few other places as well? So I mentioned that I've always been very active at the state level with representatives and at the State Department, State Education Department. And I wouldn't expect any of you to follow Missouri politics. You've got your own politics to be embedded in. But a couple of years back, the governor, who has since resigned, but the governor played some dirty politics, and he ousted, he effectively, through some political moves, got the state board to oust the Missouri Commissioner of Education. And he did that basically by manipulating the state board until he had 5 board members that were willing to do the deed, because the governor in Missouri does not appoint the commissioner. So it really turned education in Missouri upside down as far as state level leadership, and there was an opening. And that governor resigned because other things came out, and we had a new governor. And I was encouraged to and excited to apply for the position to be Commissioner of Education. And I genuinely felt I had a good shot at it because I had done a lot of work at the state level, And I did become a finalist. And all the way up until the last day, I really thought that I was going to get that job. What I did not know is that the former commissioner who was ousted was also a candidate. I was told that she was off working in another part of the country and was very pleased with what she was doing and wasn't interested in coming back. She and I philosophically are different, but I have great respect for her passion for kids, and she was done wrong. She was removed from her position in a way that none of us would feel would be appropriate. We wouldn't want to be treated that way politically by a governor on a position that's supposed to be non-political. So she got the job. I did not. I did not hide that from my board because I felt there was a good chance I could get the job based on the feedback I was getting. I had to have my application in November 23rd, I believe was the deadline, and they really couldn't speak to the length of the process. They thought maybe January or February, and again, all indications were that the former commissioner was not in the running. So my worry was that I have a very, very good relationship with Rockwood. It's a very emotional thing to leave Rockwood. Very good relationship with my board. I talked to my board about it, started with my board president, and I think that they saw benefit to me being commissioner, so they were willing to allow me to retire because I had an ongoing 3-year running contract. So to retire at the end of the year, because I'm still there until June 30th. Had I not done that, and had I received the job sometime here in January, February, and Rockwood wasn't engaged in a search process, they would have been really left out in the cold, and it would have been a very bad way to leave the district, where they would probably have had to had an interim superintendent. That can be okay, but I didn't want to force them to do that. So they engaged the search process. They're in the middle of it and about to name a new superintendent, but I didn't feel it was appropriate to try to back that up or derail that. People asked me that. Community members asked me that, but I didn't want to be that guy. Every time something went wrong now in the future, I'd be that guy, well, you were going to leave anyway, so what do you care? So I've got the years in the system, but I've got a lot of gas left in the tank. So I'm looking for other regions and places where I can take my leadership experience and be effective as I have been in the past.
Thank you, sir. Well, let's dive right in. We've got till 5 o'clock, so let's accelerate and move along. I want to leave enough time for follow-ups. Question number 1, please share your experiences and beliefs about engaging the assets, resources, and capabilities of the community in support of student success.
Well, my beliefs are that you don't have any other choice but to capitalize on any and all resources that are available to us for youth these days. Kids, things are just much different than my experience growing up. We've got a social emotional crisis in our country, the rates of suicide, the rates of depression, the rates of bullying. We deal with that. I think that's all stemming from those self-awareness and those social emotional needs of kids. The special education needs that kids have. Sometimes they're not special education. We'll maybe in this group we'll discuss the disproportionality conversation a little bit, but you've got to turn to your community for resources, and we do that. We have a multitude of MOUs, memorandums of understanding, that we sign with local agencies to help us expand our staff and what our needs are. We have a lot of social workers. We even started hiring behavior therapists a few years ago, but we have 21,000 students, and here you've got between 15,000, 16,000. That's a lot of kids to serve needs. You have to have partners in the resources that the community have. Many of you, all of you, represent those very things. So it's, my belief is that there's no other choice, and it's, that, not to use a cliche, but that it takes a village concept is legitimate. It does. You have to have a community fully engaged in the efforts to help kids thrive. I can't do it by myself. So community resources are a must.
Thank you. Next question. How do you define the term collaboration in the context of school and community partnerships? And how would you promote the ethic of collaboration at all district levels?
Collaborating with people is a byproduct of the two-way relationship that you build with people. I'm a big relationship guy. I said to you early that I'm rather simple, and I don't mind admitting that, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. I think behind every issue that you have, and I would, if we had time, I'd say let's play a game. Name an issue. Name a almost every issue behind it is a problem with a relationship, whether it's between two people or between two different beliefs or between two different entities. So collaboration to me is an extension of relationships and honoring the voices of many who have a stake. We're a public school. We're owned by the taxpayers. And we are that safety net for all kids, and we create the future in our youth. I really feel like I'm sounding like a commercial or a song, but so collaborating with people through building relationships is how it works, and that's how I lead. I lead by engaging people, by building positive relationships one at a time. You all heard that. I'm filled with cliches in this session, but the starfish story about saving the starfish and throwing the one back and say you can't affect all of them. Well, you know, it helped that one. An inch at a time, building trust. My father is a big role model in my life, passed away in March of 2017, taught me that just like you save money in the bank, you have to build up trust by storing away those items that make trust, because if you don't build up trust when you need it, it won't be there. And that takes collaboration, that takes respect of other people, that takes acknowledgement that just because I'm holding the reins, working for a board of education and guiding a school district, that while I may have answers for everything, they may not always be the right answers, and I have to listen. But I would promote it by doing, by living my words and being an example for all. It's amazing what an effective superintendent can do through living by example and engaging people and communicating well and building relationships. It's amazing what you can see a turnaround in trust and what you can accomplish by collaborating and engaging all people and resources and honoring all voices.
Okay, thank you. How would you approach the challenges and opportunities associated with community use of district facilities and equipment during non-school hours?
I'm just smiling because I've not been asked that question yet today. Every question is a manifestation of a previous question, and that is a brand new one, and it's a good one. I deal with that all the time. Well, let me when we talk about the word approach, I think the word approach is that we need to be accommodating with our facilities. I don't know if that's the right answer. I don't know if there's a problem with that. I haven't seen that in any of my research, but again, it's the community schools, and there are things that are important to children in the community beyond the day of education. So I just believe that we have to accommodate, and of course there's a system that has to be in place that's organized. It can't be a free-for-all. It can't just be that the doors are open and anybody can come in at any time. That's not a good scenario, but it needs to be managed to where if the resources are available and people have a need, especially a need that partners in the effort to make an impact on our children and on our community, then by golly, we should make every effort to do that and to accommodate that, especially non-school hours. I've really dealt more recently in this day and age of being worried so much about school safety and people that aren't staff coming in more. I've dealt more with that concern about during school hours, you know, when you have partnerships where other people may be in the building during the day and there's worries about safety. But non-school hours, if the school's available, we should accommodate that. And we, of course, have to have the resources. I mean, if you know, if a room like this is going to be used by a group and they're going to be brainstorming and have breakout sessions and have food, you obviously have to have the appropriate cleanup and things to make sure that the room is returned to what it needs to be for the next event. But we need to accommodate people requesting to use our facilities. And I call it equal access. We can't pick and choose. I mean, if as a public facility, if we allow you know, a group that we have to be connected with to use a facility, but then we say, oh, we don't like that group that much, we're not going to honor them. That's not appropriate. It's not fair to vet things that way. So that's part of the partnership. And that's how I approach it. I approach it by saying we need to do it.
Thank you. Describe your experiences working with faith-based groups to support the work of schools.
So I meet with two different groups twice a year in my Rockwood community, and a lot of it has overlap. So it ends up being 4 times a year with some of the same folks. But one are all of our faith leaders. So any faith-based organization that has leadership in the district, they have a church, they have a synagogue, they have a mosque, they have a kingdom hall, whatever it may be. They are invited to come meet with me. We really don't have much of an agenda other than I usually keep them abreast of things that are going on in the school district and try to just open up dialogue. And really, the dialogue is usually the best part. But the other day is our private parochial schools that come in twice a year too. And again, there's crossover because some of those faith-based leaders are leaders of the schools or connected to the schools. So, you know, they're a big part of our mission to help kids thrive. We can't deny that, and we shouldn't deny that. There are families who are very, very connected to their faith, and it's a part of their child's upbringing. And you know, we're in many ways trying to accomplish the same mission. We want to love and nurture kids, and we want them to thrive, and we want them to take care of us someday in a good way and take care of our world. And so I think I don't know, it was describe your experiences. They've been positive, and it's been open dialogue, and we work together, and we communicate, and we collaborate, and it's a positive outcome. I think they have stock in our district because of that relationship.
And another follow-up question about faith-based relationships. Have you ever addressed a complaint about the exercise of religious freedom in schools? And if yes, how did you address it?
Yeah, you cannot be a public educator for 31 years without addressing that. I've addressed it on both sides. I've addressed it on the side of people thinking that staff members proselytizing or teaching a little too far into a certain religion. I've addressed it on the side of child's right. You know, it just drives me nuts when I hear, please don't take this as a political comment, but you know, the people that criticize public schools love to say that, well, you know what happened? They took God out of schools. I'd like to know when that happened, because I have, in my 31 years, only been associated with people who have protected the rights of children to believe what they want to believe. I've seen kids pray with each other over lunch. We have the, you know, nationwide kids that meet at the flagpole on prayer day. Those differences are honored, and they should be honored. Of course, a lot of times people that are critics, they want to see their religion honored, but not the religion necessarily of others. So I as far as how I address it, I'm going to always address things like that to make sure the rights of students are honored. So whatever side of that conversation I'm on, I'm going to focus on what's the rights of our students. We learned a long time ago through an infamous court case that the rights of students, they do not shed those rights at the schoolroom door. They have a right to believe and a right to practice, and we have to appreciate that and understand it. And again, as I said at the last question, for many kids, that's a big part of their life. But make it clear that I'm talking about all those varieties of diversity in religion and such. It's not just one, and we have to make sure that as a staff that we are not treating students of certain religions or faiths differently than others. That's not our job to do that. We're not here to judge. We're not here to say you're different than me and you should think this way. We're here to love kids, nurture kids, help them thrive in the world by being who they are and who they came to us as.
Thank you. How do you view a school district's role in helping meet the basic human and social service needs of students living in poverty?
The one thing we cannot figure out well, and we deserve to be criticized in public education across our country, is we cannot figure out how to effectively jump the barriers of poverty when it comes to kids being successful. And I'm not suggesting that kids from poverty haven't been successful. There are plenty that have. But by and large, we know that achievement gaps relate to socioeconomics. We know that kids who struggle with different barriers than their counterparts are going to have trouble thriving, not only in school but beyond school. So basic human needs are why I say the social and emotional needs of children are more important than the academic needs of children. Now again, if this were my 10th or 15th year in education, I probably would be really scared to say that to all day long in education, because people would say, what? We were about academic success and kids going off to college and all those kinds of things. I just don't believe that. I believe that the basic human needs are more important than anything, and without them, however successful a child may be from an academic standpoint or a post-secondary, whether it's college or career, it's going to be less than what it could be if those basic needs have not been addressed and met. So I view a school district's role in what we're talking about, being engaged and tapping resources that we have in a community, making sure that we structure our staff in a way to address those needs, having character education programs in place, and educating the whole child, and understanding that poverty exists, and it's a very strong force against the success of a child. And we have to realize that. We have to realize that in everything from disciplining children to again, helping them graduate, that realizing those forces do impact children. There are things that, instead of just having a laser focus on what the problem at hand is, for instance, discipline, doing discipline without considering the greater issue or the greater need is a sure way to continue kids from poverty living a life of crime and making choices that people may say they're choices they can control, but if we're not careful, we can be part of that in the wrong way. So we have to meet their basic human needs to the best of our ability. If that means helping a kid get the dental work that he's not otherwise getting because he dealing with a mouth that's hurting him all day long, and maybe that's why he's acting out and not doing well academically. We just can't afford to ignore those things, but it takes resources. But we have to approach it by saying that it is truly a school district's role to consider those basic human needs of our children in order to help them thrive.
Thank you. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, so I'm going to read this question to you, and hopefully the battery will
past 6.
the battery will kick in at some point. Next question. What are your experiences with making arts funding a priority within a school district, even when funding falls short?
I just cannot fathom. There you go. I just can't fathom that's in some communities across our country that's a go-to cut. Some of the very things that keep kids engaged in learning are the things that we cut. I can tell you right now, my fine arts programs growing up served me a lot better than any math class I ever had. And I mean that sincerely. And please, if you're a mathematician, I do believe math is important, and I have a much greater appreciation for it now as an adult than I did as a child. And I like what we're doing in some of the innovative ways we're teaching math nowadays. But I don't think that I would ever make a decision to cut funding for arts. I don't care what the downside of that would be. There's got to be other examples. The way we're going to find success and diminish achievement gaps in kids is to get more personalized in our approach and to make sure that we are honoring the sparks of our children. What are the passions of our children? You know how many children come to school every day just because of that drama production that they're going to be in at the end of the month, or just because that jazz band that meets, before school in the morning, or just because that choir trip that they're going to take to sing at the state conference. There are kids that's their reason. That's the reason they get up. That's the reason they come to school. And you take that out of the equation, and maybe you take care of the academic needs of children, but you're not creating a world that's that's collectively a representation of the diverse children that come to us as public educators.
Thank you. What has been your experience interacting with school foundations, and what do you perceive to be the role of a school foundation in relation to a school district?
Well, I've had some interesting experiences. I had a pretty thriving foundation that I worked with in the Melville School District that it did not have there was not a paid executive director. It was a parent volunteer group is really what it was, but they were very effective in working. Mainly they focused on scholarships, the endowment piece, and tried to give kids opportunities through some monetary contributions beyond high school. When it came to Rockwood always had a very well-functioning foundation with a paid executive director. But when I walked into the district, there was a lot of angst around it. The executive director was not practicing in a trusting manner. I don't know that there was anything wrong necessarily that we uncovered as far as or inappropriate, but there was a lack of trust. She was paying herself on the hours that she was working and things like that. So unfortunately, I had to pull a plug on the foundation in the Rockwood School District, and we have never gotten back to a true foundation because it's still too painful for a lot of people because it was so effective for so many years. But we have built other similar types of foundations that aren't really calling themselves foundations. Instead, we have something that's called Rockwood Gives Back. That's a parent community member partnership with the district where they focus on they take in, whether it's endowments or, and they're going to do some scholarship pieces in the future, but they try to be a resource for kids and their educational needs, kind of a clearinghouse, if you will. So there's the role of a school foundation should be to help a district help kids thrive and to be more resources for more kids. It's a great place to, again, usually foundations do a good job of bringing those endowments through a foundation because they have the right filing with the state and the right status. But interacting is always been positive. I just had this unfortunate thing that I inherited when I came to Rockwood. But, I always like to make office space. I always like to make sure that we're engaging our foundation folks, executive director, whoever that may be, in dialogue and conversations and being collaborative with them as well. They have a place in helping us help kids thrive, and we have to honor that.
Thank you. This is an organizational question, sir. Describe how you would organize a large system, such as Davenport Community School District, to ensure checks and balances are in place so that no one individual, group, or department is able to have undue power or influence over the functioning of the whole system.
I want to first tell you something kind of humorous. I've been going all day long, and I just admitted something. Every once in a while, I've seen that DCSD pop up, and you go through this kind of intense interviewing all day. It's a little stressful, but I handle stress well. But that popped up earlier, and I got distracted because the questions were in front of me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's an acronym I don't know. I thought it was some kind of educational jargon. I finally figured it out. So I'm ahead of it now because I know. But anyway, I answered a question similar to this earlier today, and I think that they may have thought that I didn't answer it or I answered it the wrong way. And that's okay because my intent was still appropriate. I believe in school districts and organizations being developed around the concept of a culture of people and not a culture of compliance. School districts, especially large school districts, have a history of becoming bureaucracies. And all too often, bureaucracies are focused on the bureaucracy, and the focus on why the bureaucracy exists gets out of line a little bit. So the reason I'm saying that is because I have an extremely effective human resources department, but they are left over of a mindset of that bureaucracy, and while they're so nice and they seem so effective and so smart about our policies, in my first couple of years in Rockwood, when I would travel around to schools and hear and listen and learn, there was so much complaining about how human resources is not helpful to the needs. And I'd heard stories about, well, this employee, and she found out her husband had cancer and she needed some additional leave time, and called and got this really kind person on the phone. And they said, oh my gosh, really sorry to hear that. That's horrible. But let me see. Oh, well, policy doesn't let us do that. So sorry, we can't help you today. That's not a culture of people. That's a culture of compliance. So I just feel I have to say that when we talk about things like checks and balances, because I believe that the way you find accountability, because again, I've seen it. I'm not just, firing this at you as an untried or something that I don't know to be effective. When you build cultures of people, and your one superintendent is modeling that culture, and your one superintendent is walking the walk and talking the talk, and exempling, giving leadership examples of exactly what is expected, what are the expectations, how we treat people, how we act toward people. When you do that, it becomes a system of checks and balances because the expectation is understood. And when you build relationships with people, they don't want to disappoint the people that are leading them. And so you see the need for that diminish significantly. But having said that, clearly, we can't have anybody having undue power or influence over a system. So in the meantime, that goes back to previous questions of making sure all the appropriate people have voice, feel heard, feel appreciated, and are engaged and have access to the leadership. I think if you combine that with demonstrating high expectations and an organization that's designed around the people and the humanistic needs, your concerns about that are going to be, I'm not going to say non-existent. There's always the possibility, but are going to be far and few between.
Thank you. What are immediate actions you would take to address disproportionate rates of in-school and out-of-school suspensions of students of color in both special and general education? And a side question of, do you have any experience with restorative justice practices?
Yes, on the last one, very much so in recent years, and I'll come back to that. You know, the disproportionality, as I've said, that's not anything that's unique to the Davenport Community Schools. The whole country is wrestling with disproportionate rates of suspension on students of color. And first of all, we have to be willing to talk about it. We have to be willing to call it what it is, because it just doesn't make sense. It does not make sense, and you can all look all across our country and pick out any school, and you may see some that are better than others, but when you see these disproportionate rates of suspension that tend to impact minority students, that doesn't make sense. And we have to understand that there are stereotypes alive and well in all of us. There are implicit biases alive and well in who we are because of the experiences that we have. We're melting pots of what we came up around and who we learned from and who taught us. And until we recognize that, you know, there's that whole pride thing of, no, I'm not the least bit prejudiced toward any group. I don't have a racist bone in my body. That is denial of a problem that we have and that we have to understand in our country, and we have to approach a willingness to actually have the conversation. So I don't know how alive that is in the Davenport Community Schools. I don't know if that conversation exists on a genuine level. I know the conversation exists about disproportionate rates because I see it when I Google and when I research, but I don't know what conversation is being had in school buildings with educators, with staff members, with families. I don't know the exercises that are taking place to recognize the implicit biases that people have. And it's not only, there are other things that we deal with that biases. You know, dyslexia is a huge issue with children now than it was previously, or maybe it always was, but we just didn't know it. There are more and more kids identified with dyslexia that causes learning disabilities and problems, their ability to function the same. And I see biases about that all the time. I had my youngest daughter who's about to turn 20. When she was in second grade, she dealt with a high level of anxiety. We couldn't figure it out for a long time. We finally figured out that it was all really relative to an episode where she got the stomach flu once and got sick in front of some kids, and it was a horrible, horrible experience for her. And on top of that, she had hypoglycemia, which meant her body chemistry didn't regulate, kind of the opposite, if you will, of diabetes. And when you have that, you feel sick a lot. So she became very paranoid about being sick in public, and she wanted to be home. She didn't want to run that risk. And when she would worry, she would feel sick. It was a horrible cycle. But she never wanted to stay home from school. She always wanted to be at school. And we would always know she was better when she'd be asking us to take her to school. And the doctors said, let her control it. That's the way. Build the trust with her. Let her control her situation. But I would deal with educators who would say things, and they didn't mean harm, but it was painful to hear an educator say to me, you just need to get her to school. She's fine when she's here. You know, I'm her dad. I know she's fine when she's there. You know, she's not at home throwing up where you don't see her. That's an example of implicit things that people don't realize they say and do that hurts other people. It's the same with stereotyping and assumptions, and sometimes it's because I think a lot of this comes back to the barriers associated with poverty. And sometimes educators don't know where to turn when they don't have all the answers to fixing a situation with a kid. And it becomes easy to say, well, you know, you did that, so we've got to suspend you. But it's also in the over-identification of special needs. Kids are inappropriately diagnosed with special needs at a higher rate, kids of color, than their counterparts. Restorative justice practices, yes, and implementing a lot with that, helping kids to understand that if we don't know by now that simply slapping a suspension on a child as okay, there's a consequence, and learn from that now. Doing it, once, you burn once, don't get burned again. Just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So the idea of restorative justice, helping kids learn and feel and understand in a very human way how what they do impacts other people, and the opportunity to deal with that is just really, really powerful. And some people get confused. They think that means, I really get frustrated when I hear people say, there's many different sarcastic things that I've heard, but give a kid a cookie when they do something wrong. And what they mean by they're trying to say that they went down and that we claim that a restorative effort has taken place, and they claim no, you just hug the kid and send them back to class and they didn't learn anything. That's again a bias and a stereotype. So we have to get at the heart of the matter if we want to keep kids from reoccurring the same behaviors over and over again. And in many cases, when it's connected to poverty, we're creating pipelines to prison that we have to bust, and restorative practices can do that. Doesn't mean they're not accountable. You have to have accountability to discipline and such that a child, but it may mean that the discipline in this situation looks different than this situation. If the kid has learned, you're an administrator dealing with a child that, number one, you just learned the horrible thing going on in their home, and the child is shedding tears, and you can feel their pain, and you know that they've learned, then you got to be careful. Just making them hurt more by slapping on lengthy consequences. It's just not. It's not always productive.
Okay, I do want to leave enough time for a few follow-ups, so if we could move through these next questions as quickly as possible without sacrificing any of the meaning in your remarks, we would appreciate that. What are the immediate actions you would take to increase the number of students of color participating in advanced placement and talented and gifted programs?
There's a little bit of that stereotype question that goes there, but we have a long-standing pull-out talented and gifted program in Rockwood. It's a center-based, so each school has, in the elementaries, each school has a schedule where their kids that are identified as gifted, they get pulled out and sent to this place for a day. And I'm not going to lie that it's a wonderful place. I'm not going to lie that there are wonderful things going on. It's very hands-on, very experiential, which I'm a big proponent of. But I frustrate people when I always ask me, I go and I see a good thing and I'm watching it and it's great. And I'm seeing these kids and I say, now tell me why all kids can't benefit from this. And, I'll get a lot of times the concept that, oh, no. You got to be at a certain level to really grasp the understanding of this. And I do understand there are some things. So I think one step is by inviting them in to programs. We've done that. We've tried to increase our kids that are in our AP courses, and you surprise people. There's people that will tell you can't. He's not going to make it. Don't put him in there. And you put him in and they soar. Sometimes you put them in and they don't. And you need to be there to help pick them up and provide them the resources. So I think we have to examine, and I don't know the process for those things in the Davenport Community Schools. I don't know how kids end up in advanced placement. I don't know how they end up in the gifted program. So obviously I'm limited in what I can say, but I think that if it's disproportionate, and I'm sure it is, then you need to examine the practices and figure out how we get kids more interested. Yeah, I know you're looking at time, so I'll keep that brief.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And the final question before we open it up, and it's obviously a complex question, but how would you lead the effort to continuously improve the quality of education as we experience severe budget cuts?
Yeah, I've talked throughout the day. I think I mentioned it early on in this. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Forgive me. I don't know when I've said what today. I turned on the news last night in my hotel room, and I was kind of paying attention. I was organizing some things, and I heard my name. Which is kind of weird when you're in a hotel room out of town. Well, they were talking about Davenport Public Schools, and I said my name wrong. They said Knost instead of Knost, but it still caught because I've been called that a lot of times. But then it followed up with talking about these interviewing these parents that feel very disengaged and disenfranchised, if you will, about the district. And then it followed up with a report about a student bringing a gun to school yesterday. And I thought, my goodness. And then I coupled that with the fact that when it came out that I was a finalist, the Quad Cities Times contacted me, and I love the media. I've created a really good relationship with the media. It wasn't always that way, but I got spoiled, because clearly this person called me and had a slant in the questions being asked about coming to Davenport, and I thought, my goodness, there's some work to do there. But I don't. I know there's been a board-approved 5-year plan that talks about some drastic cuts. If I have one overarching concern about coming here to be superintendent, it's the fact that that's going to be handed to me as already a board-approved plan, and I don't know what the movable parts are, but it's very strange, awkward, difficult to be the leader of an organization to go through some severe cuts that you had no say-so in creating the plan. So I'm interested in finding out more. But I think all of the things we talked about in the other questions, genuine leadership, a culture of people, a culture of human beings, modeling high expectations, all of those things lead people to understand and maybe even help fix, because maybe the outward bound students start coming back in, as what I've experienced in my past with kids, going out to the private parochials, and then we change the view and change the dialogue of the school. And right now it seems like those ugly things overshadow the good things that I hear, and that needs to be flipped, and that can happen through leadership. So you just lead people through in a student-centered way, and make sure that when you have to make cuts, somebody asked me earlier, how are you going to go about closing buildings? And I said, well, I don't want to close buildings. And maybe you do have to, but I haven't been part of that process. But that's painful to tell a family that your kid goes here now, but not next year. We're not going to let that happen, because we've got to close that up. So I just need to be better. I need to be into the weeds on that plan and understanding it. But we're going to keep kids at the center of all of our decisions and make sure that we do things that help kids thrive. And that's the only metric I need. If the decisions we make are decisions that help kids thrive, we'll be okay. If not, then we've got problems.
Okay, thank you for those responses. I'd like to take the time that we have left, and there's not as much as I had hoped, but if there are questions from the group that you feel you really want to follow up on, now will be the time. So if you would, just make sure you press your button and advance your question.
So St. Louis all your life, why here? You mean now? I did tell the story about the commissioner, so you know why I'm.
I know why you're
you know why I'm retiring, but
Yeah,
why
I know why you're
Davenport?
leaving, but are we just a job, or are we a community that you're coming to be a part of?
I have zero familiarity beyond seeing the opening and then becoming familiar with. And then I think I've said to a couple groups today, I had no idea. I've been through Davenport once prior to this experience to interview, but I didn't know much about it. And I really didn't think that there would be a whole lot of people. But as you know, it's state law here in Iowa to publish finalists. That doesn't happen in Missouri. Nobody finds out who the superintendent is until they announce who it is. But that started trickling down a little bit, and now I think everybody that lives in Rockwood grew up in Davenport because they're all calling me and reaching out saying, "Hey, I see you're a candidate up there, and let me tell you about this." It's all been positive stuff. So to back up my decision, though, really, there's a lot of openings out there. I paid specific attention geographically to places that would not. I didn't want to move across the country. I wanted to stay relatively close to my roots. So when you kind of draw a perimeter, and they all ended up being north. I'm just not real interested in opportunities that are south. I'm staying at the current. Yeah, current, is that right? Mm-hmm. The current, yeah. And when I punch in my GPS at the current to my address at home, it is precisely 4 hours. That's not moving across the country. So that has the initial reason of that radius is how I picked to apply for various openings. But beyond that, I think a lot of what the Davenport Community Schools have experienced and are experiencing are things that I've led through. I like to work. I don't like to be a placeholder. So I like challenges. And I like to be engaged in a community, and I love the arts, and the arts seem to be thriving here. I love what's happened to downtown. I keep saying that like something happened yesterday, but I don't know how long the downtown rebirth has been in place, but it's just a good feeling to be down there. So to me, it makes sense. I think we're all, obviously this process is to help the board and me both understand, is it a good fit? Is it the right fit? Maybe at the end of the day, that's not decided that it's me. But it sure appears to have some of those important pieces that would make it for an exciting challenge for me.
So I'm hovering in the background here. I sure don't want to cut anyone off, but just kind of continue your discussion. We have a 5:45 is our next meeting. Not that we've kind of been grilling him all day, so I don't know how much
That's
more
okay.
time you need. It's been a very
That's
long
okay.
day. But what do you think, John? Do you wanna...
We can take one more, and then I'll also let you know that we have a form.
Yes.
That if we don't have enough time, and obviously we don't take all the questions, please write them on this form and leave it. Or you can also go to our website. There's a feedback section there. Or I don't know what the timeliness of this is. Can they take it with them and bring it back to me?
So I should probably say, I don't know most of you. I'm Julie DeSalvo. I'm a member of the Davenport Community School District School Board. So first of all, thank you for being here. Your feedback is incredibly important to us as we make this very, very difficult decision. So these forms are for your input. If you want to take it home and kind of hash over it, I need it back. I know we've rescheduled your session from yesterday to Friday. So when you come Friday is when I'm really going to need them back, because the board will then reconvene probably Saturday and try to look through this information, compile all the input that we've received this week, and then go from there. So thanks for your input. I sure don't want to rush you, but
We're 5:45, and it's
Right.
not that far.
No. So
I've got time if there's other questions.
I'm just gonna kind of hover in the
I appreciate you looking out after me, but
Do you need water?
no, I got water. I think I've got too much water.
I didn't have much
Soon I will have to go.
anything all day, so.
It's hard to eat, and I'm hoping when I go eat with the board that we can actually just casually, because it's really hard to have food in front of you and be asked questions, because as soon as you put a piece of food in your mouth, you got to answer something. It can't be really too graceful that way.
John, did you have a question?
Yeah. I really appreciate your talking about the school being a community asset and really belonging to the community. And then also your discussion around poverty. The issue of school closing is going to come up really, really soon, and a lot of us have been involved in sort of pushing back on the school board's decisions to really focus only on inner city schools for closing. And it seems that it almost contradicts the school board's or the school district's commitment to address all issues of poverty when they only focus on schools where there's the most entrenched poverty and where the school buildings themselves and all the learning that goes on in those buildings are in neighborhoods where there's the most concentrated level of poverty. It only exacerbates poverty in our community. So you're dealing with a really difficult budget deficit, 5-year plan that you have no control over. But would you exempt schools in the inner city from consideration of being closed?
Yeah, I would love to say absolutely. What I don't know is the why. I just have so much learning to do.
Even with all the ripple effect and
what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. Let me just tell you that. And I fought against in the St. Louis region. We had some. I'm trying to find a better word than stupid, but I'm just going to say a stupid thing attached to a law that said when a school went unaccredited, that the kids then had, because we don't have open enrollment, but the kids then had the right to all go to another school district, and the school district had to pay for the transportation to at least one. And it did exactly what you're describing. It would decimate that community instead of lifting up that community. So I agree with all that you're saying, and it makes sense. But I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know the how or the why behind that, and that's the scary part about this plan.
Yeah. So the other part of all that is at the very same time that the city of Davenport is investing millions and millions of dollars into revitalizing, the downtown, the current, the school district is closing the schools most near where that population is growing, and where we see the real growth. And so getting the city of Davenport and the school district all on the same page around growth and sustainable growth is something that we need.
Sounds like it. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Are there any other burning questions that really require Dr. Knost's presence for you to ask, or are there other questions that might come through the forms that you've been provided with? Anything burning that just really has to have his presence here?
You
want to respect his time.
You've really put your finger on exactly what I was describing earlier. That is why the one thing that is just the overriding thing that's just in my mind is learning about this 5-year plan.
Yeah.
That I just don't know a whole lot about. So I'm sure if things move forward with the discussion with me, there's going to have to be a lot of answers that I get to help better understand what those things are, and again, how movable those parts are.
Thank you.
We could end on a light note. One of the questions I didn't include very briefly is, what do you do for recreation?
So I said earlier, I guess you'd have to define recreation, but of course I love spending time with my family and my daughters when they're home. But that means usually that's going out to a good restaurant, and then sitting on a couch and I love King of Queens. Anybody watch King of Queens? I was so glad that this hotel had TV Land, because TV Land plays the King of Queens from 10:30 till midnight, and I fall asleep to King of Queens every night. That Arthur Spooner, he's just a trip. But I'm a musician, so that's my avocation, I guess you would say. But I do play professionally, and with my schedule, I keep that alive maybe once or twice a month in various clubs around St. Louis, and enjoy that very much. And then I work.
Okay. What do you play?
My main instrument is drums. So that's what I play professionally. I have a music degree, so and I taught band, so I taught all instruments. Grew up with a piano, and my first instrument that was given to me specifically was a guitar. But it's kind of a funny story. When I was in 5th grade, when you could start, 6th grade, when I was in 6th grade, when you could start taking lessons at school to be in the band program, my parents were always frustrated by the neighbors who, if my parents poured a patio in their backyard, the neighbors would pour a patio in the backyard. And that my mom, it just drove her nuts. And they were friends. It was kind of interesting. But the kid next door was a year older than me, and he played drums. And I think my mom, I'll remember her saying, Eric, I think you ought to play drums. And I think it's because she was wanting me to. And here I am, a professional musician with a music degree and a drummer all these years later, and that kid does not play drums anymore. So my mom got the last word on that one.
Well, I think I speak for the group in saying we appreciate your thoughtful answers and responses. It's been a pleasure discussing them with you. I also want to take the time to thank the group for coming today to meet Dr. Knost, and we wish you all the best going forward, and I hope you enjoy Davenport.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed meeting you. Thank you.